Valerie Bertinelli and Eddie Van Halen once seemed like an impossible match made real. She was the wholesome face of American television, the girl next door adored by millions, while he was the electrifying guitarist redefining rock music. Together, they became one of the most fascinating couples of the 1980s, a union that blended Hollywood's brightness with rock and roll's chaos. Yet behind the fame and photographs, their marriage carried a hidden weight that would not reveal itself until years later. Valerie has now spoken openly, and what she revealed shows that their story was never as perfect as it looked. The rise of a golden couple. When Valerie Bertinelli first crossed paths with Eddie Van Halen in 1980, she was only 20 years old but already a household name. Starring as Barbara Cooper on the hit sitcom One Day at a Time, she embodied the image of reliability, kindness, and innocence. By the age of 20, she had already won 2 Golden Globes, her career carefully built on the foundation of being America's sweetheart. Her days were scripted and steady, her reputation polished, and her life followed a predictable rhythm inside television studios. Eddie Van Halen, at 26, lived on the opposite end of that spectrum. As co-founder and lead guitarist of Van Halen, he was already changing the very definition of rock music. Albums such as Van Halen and Fair Warning had pushed his band to global recognition. His groundbreaking tapping technique and fiery stage presence had made him not just a musician, but a cultural force. While Valerie represented control and discipline, Eddie stood for freedom and chaos. Despite the stark contrast, their connection was immediate. Valerie reportedly asked her boss to arrange a meeting after seeing Eddie's vibrant energy, and soon after, the two began dating. Just months later, on April 11, 1981, they were married in a private ceremony in California. The wedding caused a stir in the press because of its symbolic union between good girl television and wild rock and roll. For fans, it was like watching 2 different worlds crash together in romance. In the beginning, they embraced the thrill of it all. Valerie flew overnight flights to meet Eddie while he toured, and Eddie often joined her on set. The pair appeared inseparable, a golden couple that seemed to carry the dreams of 2 industries on their shoulders. Yet even in those early years, the seeds of difficulty were already being planted. Their schedules were unforgiving, their lifestyles incompatible, and the attention that came with their fame slowly began to invade the most private parts of their lives. Cracks in the marriage. Not long after the honeymoon period ended, Valerie and Eddie began to realize how different their daily lives truly were. While she continued the long hours on One Day at a Time, Eddie was consumed by rehearsals, recording sessions, and relentless touring schedules. Valerie often found herself boarding red-eye flights, shooting her scenes during the day, and rushing overnight to catch up with her husband on the road. It was a constant balancing act that slowly drained her energy and left little room for stability. Eddie's world revolved around late nights, parties, and the unstructured chaos of a rock star's life. Valerie's revolved around scripts, studio lights, and the family values she had been raised with. This mismatch was more than just a lifestyle clash. It was a deep cultural divide between order and disorder. At first, love seemed to bridge the gap, but as the years passed, the differences grew heavier. By the mid-1980s, Eddie had begun struggling more openly with substance abuse. What may have started as occasional indulgence soon escalated into a daily dependency on alcohol and drugs. Valerie, barely in her 20s, was suddenly placed in the impossible role of caretaker and stabilizer for a man already sliding into self-destruction. The pressures of fame only worsened his behavior, and the headlines celebrated the wild rock star even as his home life deteriorated. Valerie worked tirelessly to hold the marriage together. She stood by Eddie through multiple attempts to quit, supporting him during moments of sobriety that gave her hope they could build a normal life together. But relapses always followed, each one pulling them back into a cycle of despair. Living with a man who was physically present but mentally distant left Valerie feeling increasingly isolated. By the late 1980s, cracks in their marriage were no longer just private struggles. Eddie's health began to show early warning signs, though he ignored them, continuing to drink and smoke heavily. Valerie admitted years later that this was when she first felt like she was living two lives under one roof: the actress adored by millions and the lonely wife trying to rescue a man spiraling out of reach. Parenthood and the struggle to hold on. In March 1991, Valerie and Eddie welcomed their only child, Wolfgang Van Halen. For Valerie, the birth of her son was not only the happiest moment of her life, but also her last hope of stabilizing a marriage that was already showing deep fractures. She once admitted that Wolfgang's arrival was her final attempt to keep the family together. For a time, it seemed to work. The couple shifted their attention to their child, and Valerie put her long-term projects on hold to focus on motherhood. Becoming a mother gave Valerie new purpose. She was determined to create a stable environment for Wolfgang, shielding him from the instability that plagued their home. Eddie, too, loved his son deeply, and when he was present, he could be affectionate and proud. But his life on the road and his ongoing battle with addiction often meant he was absent during key milestones. Valerie would later describe this period as living two lives under one roof, one centered on nurturing her child, the other consumed by loneliness in a fractured marriage. Throughout the 1990s, Valerie and Eddie worked hard to present a united front. They appeared together at public events, smiling for cameras and maintaining the illusion of a stable family. Behind the scenes, however, the emotional distance was growing. Valerie often had to step into the role of both parents, attending school events and supporting Wolfgang's development while Eddie was away or struggling with his demons. The sacrifices Valerie made during these years came at a personal cost. She began battling emotional distress, which manifested in disordered eating and weight fluctuations. Tabloids were relentless, focusing on her changing appearance while ignoring the pressures she endured at home. Valerie withdrew from the public eye, pouring all of her strength into raising Wolfgang. Even as her marriage strained, she refused to walk away. Her love for Eddie remained, but it was mixed with frustration, sadness, and exhaustion. She believed that if she stayed strong enough, she could help him overcome his battles. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. She was married to a man she could not save, and the illusion of a perfect family was slipping away. The silent separation and divorce. By the turn of the millennium, the cracks in Valerie and Eddie's marriage had widened into chasms. Years of substance abuse, health scares, and emotional distance had eroded the foundation they once stood on. For Valerie, the breaking point was less about one dramatic event and more about the exhaustion of living in constant turmoil. In October 2001, the couple confirmed that they had separated. The announcement came as a quiet shock. There were no angry interviews, no tabloid explosions, just a simple confirmation that one of Hollywood's most iconic couples had drifted apart after 20 years together. For 6 years, however, their divorce remained unresolved. From 2001 until December 20th, 2007, they lived in a state of limbo, legally bound but emotionally separated. During this time, Valerie chose silence. Unlike many celebrity divorces filled with accusations and legal battles, she stayed out of the spotlight. Instead, she focused on raising Wolfgang, determined to give him stability during a turbulent chapter. Eddie, meanwhile, receded further into his struggles. His health deteriorated as he battled cancer, enduring surgery to remove part of his tongue. Yet even then he continued to smoke and drink, as if unable or unwilling to escape the habits that were destroying him. The separation years were marked by speculation. Fans and media alike tried to fill in the blanks, crafting stories of betrayal, infidelity, or irreconcilable differences. In truth, the reasons were far more complicated. Valerie and Eddie had simply grown apart, their lives shaped by choices and circumstances that could no longer coexist. When the divorce was finalized in late 2007, it came without fanfare. No public feud, no bitter courtroom drama, just the quiet acknowledgement that after 26 years, their marriage had ended. For Valerie, it was not a triumph, but a quiet grief, the closing of a chapter that had defined most of her adult life. She would later admit that the silence surrounding the divorce was intentional, a way of protecting Wolfgang and giving herself space to process the pain privately. Yet the full truth of why their marriage collapsed would remain hidden for another decade. Breaking the silence. Memoirs and confessions. In 2008, Valerie Bertinelli finally broke years of silence with her memoir Losing It. For the first time, she opened the door to what had really happened behind closed doors during her marriage to Eddie Van Halen. The revelations were raw, painful, and far from the glamorous image of the golden couple that the public had once idolized. Valerie admitted that Eddie had battled drug and alcohol addiction throughout most of their relationship. Cocaine use, daily drinking, and the inability to break free from destructive habits had defined much of their life together. Even when diagnosed with mouth cancer and forced to have a third of his tongue surgically removed, Eddie refused to give up smoking or drinking. Valerie described it as slow self-destruction, a heartbreaking refusal to fight for himself, despite all the love and support she tried to give. Her honesty didn't stop there. Valerie also confessed that during one of the darkest periods in their marriage, she had an affair. She explained it not as an act of betrayal, but as a desperate attempt to feel cared for when she felt abandoned in her own home. Eddie, too, had his affairs while on tour, creating a silent opposition between them that neither spoke about but both endured. For Valerie, this was not about excusing her actions, but acknowledging the emotional void that defined their marriage. In later interviews, including a candid conversation with Oprah, Valerie described how her mental health collapsed in the early 2000s. She developed an eating disorder, gained weight uncontrollably, and withdrew from friends and public life. The cheerful TV star that millions of viewers loved was quietly falling apart behind the scenes, trying to rebuild herself while raising Wolfgang alone. By the time she published her second memoir, Enough Already, in 2022, Valerie's perspective had shifted. Therapy and sobriety had given her clarity. She no longer wrote defensively, but with acceptance. She called her marriage with Eddie beautiful but ravaged, admitting that they had come together too young, without the tools to handle fame, addiction, and isolation. It was a sobering acknowledgement that love alone had never been enough to save them. Life after Eddie, grief, growth, and hard truths. On October 6, 2020, Eddie Van Halen died after a long battle with cancer. Valerie was at his bedside with their son Wolfgang, holding his hand as he took his final breath. In that moment, years of anger and disappointment seemed to collapse into one shared truth. Despite everything, there had always been love. She later wrote, "I think he knew I forgave him. I also hope he forgave me." It was the closest they had come to reconciliation in decades. In the days following his death, Valerie posted an emotional tribute on Instagram. 35 years ago, my life changed forever when I met you, and today, I'm grateful I got to be with you in your final moment. Her grief was undeniable, but it was complicated. She had not been Eddie's wife for over a decade, yet she mourned him deeply, both as the father of her child and as the man who had defined so much of her life. In the years that followed, Valerie admitted that she idealized their marriage in the aftermath of his death. She placed herself in the role of a grieving widow, rewriting history into a soulmate story that never truly existed. By 2024, after watching Wolfgang's Behind the Music episode, she confessed publicly that Eddie was not her soulmate at all. "We hadn't been a couple for 20 years. I was in love with an idealized version of him," she said. The statement sparked debate. Some praised her courage, Others accused her of diminishing Eddie's legacy. But Valerie remained firm. For her, speaking honestly was part of healing. Meanwhile, Valerie's own life entered another turbulent chapter. Her second marriage to Tom Vitale ended in divorce in 2022. She briefly found new love with writer Mike Goodnow in 2024, only for the relationship to dissolve later that year. Through it all, she leaned on therapy, sobriety, and her bond with Wolfgang. By 2025, at the age of 65, Valerie had transformed her pain into advocacy. No longer just Eddie Van Halen's ex-wife or America's sitcom sweetheart, she became a voice for authenticity, sharing openly about anxiety, panic attacks, and the importance of self-love. Her story was no longer about a broken marriage, but about survival, truth, and the strength to start over. Valerie Bertinelli and Eddie Van Halen were once the picture of an American fairy tale, a TV star and a rock legend, bound together for more than 2 decades. But as Valerie has finally revealed, their marriage was never perfect. Addiction, distance, and heartbreak tore them apart, leaving scars that lasted long after the divorce papers were signed. Yet from that painful journey came Wolfgang, the son they both adored, and the lessons that Valerie now shares with honesty. Do you think Valerie was right to finally tell the truth after so many years of silence? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this story moving, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.